I think everyone has at least one moment in their life where they've done something stupid trying to impress someone else. Maybe they've told a lie that got out of hand, or they've hurt themselves doing something dangerous. Some people might have even started a war in the process of trying to one up their spouse. Okay, maybe that last one's not all too common, but it has happened at least once. The story of this marital conflict turned war is the main subject of an old Irish epic called the Táin, Cúailnge, better known by its English title, The Cattle Raid of Cooley. It tells the story of Queen Meb's attempt to steal a valuable bull from the Kingdom of Ulster, and the bloody war that erupts as a result. The Táin is one of the most famous narratives from Ireland's mythological pre-Christian past, and it features a number of important mythical characters like the warrior hero Cuchulainn. But even if mythology is not your thing, I think the Táin still has a lot to appreciate. At its core, this is a story about pride, prestige, and the way that these things can drive close friends and neighbors to destroy one another as they fight over positions in hierarchies defined by wealth, strength, and gender. But in spite of all the blood and boasting, I think there is a tragic beauty to the Táin Bó Cúailnge and its characters, who pursue power and glory at any cost. The war that makes up the bulk of the story begins with a bit of pillow talk that spirals out of control. One night, Meb's husband Alil tells her how lucky she is to have a husband to provide for her, and Meb, as co-ruler of the kingdom, reminds Alil of her own substantial contributions to their combined wealth, which includes a long list of wedding gifts that she gave to him. But the king is unwilling to share the metaphorical pants in their relationship. To settle their dispute, Alil and Meb compare all their possessions and come to conclude that each is equally wealthy. Or they would be, if Alil did not possess the great white bull, Finnbennach, who is extremely fertile and thus extremely valuable. In the process of satisfying his ego, Alil also drives Meb into a competitive frenzy, and she spends the following days searching all of Ireland for a bull that is even more valuable than her husband's. Eventually, she finds one in the province of Ulster, the great brown bull, Don Cúailnge. But when the bull's owner refuses to give him away, the queen resolves to take him by force back to her fortress in Connacht, and thus the Táin proper begins. Meb's army marches into Ulster expecting an easy fight because all but one of the Ulster warriors are currently afflicted by a curse that causes them to experience the pain of childbirth. Unfortunately for Meb, the one guy unaffected by the curse just so happens to be Cuchulainn, the greatest warrior in all of Ireland. Cuchulainn is everything you'd expect from a mythological hero. He's loved by women, envied by men, and he's really good at killing. Cuchulainn manages to hold off Meb's army single-handedly, killing hundreds of her warriors in combat over the course of several days. But even Cuchulainn needs some time to rest after casually slaughtering half an army, so Ulster sends out its backup, an army of boys who are too young to be affected by the childbirth curse. This goes about as well as you might expect. When he awakes and hears that all the boys are dead, Cuchulainn flies into a rage known as the Riastrad, commonly translated as warp spasm. In this state, Cuchulainn becomes monstrously deformed, his skin turning red and his body warping in gruesome ways that none of these artistic interpretations can really do justice. For the rest of the day, Cuchulainn tears his way through Meb's army in a rage that none of her soldiers can withstand. To stop Cuchulainn, Meb sends an exiled Ulsterman, Cuchulainn's foster brother Ferdiad, to face him in battle. At first, Ferdiad is unwilling to fight his old friend, but Meb tells the exile that Cuchulainn had been boasting that it would be no great accomplishment for him to slay Ferdiad in a duel. Offended by these allegations, Ferdiad rides out to fight his foster brother, and for 3 days the pair is locked in combat. Even though the old friends fight seriously, they still embrace one another after the first 2 days of battle, and their charioteers even retire to the same campfire each night. But on the 3rd day, the fighting turns bitter. That night there is no embrace, and when the warriors meet again on the 4th morning, Cuchulainn enters his Rastrad once more. In his rage, Cuchulainn throws the magical Gaebolga spear, killing Ferdiad with the weapon and putting an end to the pair's long friendship. I think the Táin reaches its dramatic height in this duel, as it not only provides an opportunity for Cuchulainn to face an evenly matched opponent, but it also captures the darker side of all these heroic battles in the character of Ferdiad. Ferdiad doesn't want to fight Cuchulainn, primarily because the pair share a long relationship. But in his heart, Ferdiad also knows he lacks the strength to defeat his friend. When Meb falsely tells Ferdiad that Cuchulainn insulted his skill as a warrior, he's presented with two options: to die at the hands of his old friend, or to live in disgrace for not defending his honor. This unsolvable dilemma shows how such a fiercely competitive world can lead even to the destruction of people who are considered elites in their profession. Despite, or more accurately because he is a great warrior, Ferdiad must respond to all challenges to his status, or else he risks his position in the social hierarchy. Ferdiad's need to defend his warrior's reputation forces him into battles where there can be no positive outcome. An identity built on violence and sustained by violence can only end in violence. But even if you're the best warrior in Ireland, with no fear of death, there is still tragedy in a life of heroic battle. In other tales of the Ulster cycle, Cuchulainn displays the same hyper-competitive tendencies that lead to Ferdiad's demise, while in the Táin, Cuchulainn is mainly motivated by a need to defend his home. Cuchulainn is probably the most heroic character in the Táin, but his bouts of rage also transform him into the most literally monstrous figure in the story. Cuchulainn's dual nature as both hero and monster really encapsulates the Táin's central themes of pride and prestige as things that are both desirable and destructive. The end of his duel with Ferdiad drives this point home with the Gae Bolga, the magic spear that recalls other special weapons in myth and popular culture, such as Excalibur or the many named weapons in Lord of the Rings. Cuchulainn's exclusive use of the spear marks him out for exceptional prestige, much like Excalibur does for King Arthur. But the spear itself is not the noble weapon one would first expect it to be. When the Gae Bolga strikes Ferdiad, it goes coursing through the highways and byways of his body, so that every single joint filled with barbs. And that's about as gory a way to go as I can imagine. The barbs make it impossible to pull the spear from Ferdiad without literally cutting up his body to remove each piece from the spikes. Put that way, the Gae Bolga sounds more like the signature weapon of a slasher movie villain than it does that of a mythological hero. The aftermath of the Gae Bolga brings the brutal reality of the Ulster Cycle's warrior culture into focus at what should be a heroic moment, but instead of glory for his victory, Cuchulainn is left only with a mess of flesh and metal that was once a friend. While Cuchulainn laments his fallen friend, Mev takes the opportunity to capture the brown bull Dun Cúailnge and send him back to her fortress in Connacht. But before Mev's army can withdraw, the Ulster men recover from their curse and rush out to fight. Famous warriors on both sides clash with each other as the final battle of the Táin ensues, and even Mev herself rides out to fight. But as the armies clash, Mev suddenly needs to retreat from the battle to relieve herself. Some translations say that she needs to urinate at this moment, probably because the more common interpretation, which says that Mev gets her period here, doesn't really make a whole lot of sense in this context. But anyways, because the period interpretation is more thematically relevant, I am inclined to go with that one. But either way, what matters is that Cuchulainn comes along, and quite literally catches Mev with her pants down. He decides to spare her life, but this incident still gives Ulster the chance they need to gain the upper hand and win the battle, forcing Mev's army to flee. Mev's ultimate defeat in the final battle is one of several episodes in the Táin that carries a current of misogyny through the story. A moment ago, I said it was more thematically relevant for Mev to relieve herself of blood rather than urine, because the incident is immediately followed by Mev's defeat and the assessment from one of her warriors that we followed the rump of a misguiding woman. It's the usual thing for a herd led by a mare to be strayed and destroyed. This is one of many times that a male character disparages Mev's abilities and integrity in male-dominated things like war, solely on the basis that she is a woman, a slanderous process that serves a similar purpose to the fabricated insults Mev herself tells to Ferdiad. In both cases, they're intended to shame the person that they're directed at and reinforce an established social hierarchy, such as men being better than women, or Cuchulainn being better than everyone else. Viewed this way, the sexism depicted in the Táin is simply another dimension of the hyper-competitive social system that the characters inhabit, and it's a great example of how harmful these systems can be. Against these odds, Mev comes out as the underdog of the story as a whole. I mean, imagine. Your husband is the only one of your peers who isn't constantly acting like he's better than you, and then one night he has to roll over in bed and whisper in your ear that he's just one bull richer than you are. Once you're in that headspace, going to war over one bull starts to seem pretty reasonable. The Tain's focus on Meb is a rare example of medieval literature that depicts a woman attempting to assert herself in a sexist society with some degree of success. Meb achieves the goal she sets out to accomplish at the start of the Táin by capturing the brown bull, and by all accounts the ludicrously overpowered Cúailnge was the only one stopping her from destroying Ulster entirely. It's true that Meb employs some dishonest methods like shaming Ferdiad to achieve her goals, but in a sense these methods are justified by Meb's need to assert herself in a social hierarchy that is specifically structured to exclude her. Also, the more socially accepted method of social climbing in this story is murder. All of this is not to say that the Táin's overall representation of women is positive, or even better than average for its time, but the prominence of Meb's character in the narrative does add an extra dimension to the themes of pride and competition that lie at the heart of the story. She is an outsider to the warrior culture of the male characters, who's fighting to gain acceptance and recognition from her peers. The real tragedy of Meb's character is the way that her pursuit of social recognition requires her to participate in the same violent hierarchies that are structured to exclude her. Much like Cúailnge, Meb is in a position where every victory carries with it a hidden loss. This intimate connection between victory and loss becomes especially prominent in the narrative's final pages. When Meb arrives back in Connacht, she introduces Cúailnge to Finnbennach, and the two bulls immediately begin to fight, because apparently even the animals in the Táin are as bloodthirsty as the human characters. Meb's army watches the bulls fight until the sun sets, and only the sound of the animals' combat can be heard in the darkness, echoing all night. When the sun rises the next day, the army watches as Cúailnge walks into the morning light, the mangled corpse of Finnbennach hanging from his horns. Badly wounded, the brown bull wanders across Ireland, back towards his home in Ulster, leaving a trail of the white bull's remains along his path. But before he can reach his destination, Cúailnge succumbs to his injuries, falling dead on the ground, still covered in the gore of his defeated foe. With that, the life of the bull the characters have been fighting over is added to the number of countless deaths both Connacht and Ulster suffered in the war. At this point, you may be prompted to ask, what was the point of all this? Sure, Meb's bull beat a Lils in a fight, which makes her the winner of the argument that kicked the whole story off, but was everything that happened in the process really worth it? The story's final lines seem to suggest that it was, as the Ulstermen return home, full of their great triumph over Meb's army. But these words ring hollow after the capture of Cúailnge, the tragic duel between Cúailnge and Ferdiad, and oh, yeah, the slaughter of all the male children in Ulster. Considering that a triumph goes right past irony and into pure nonsense, but it also highlights the tension between glory and loss that lie at the heart of the Táin. When your culture is structured entirely around a pursuit of glory, it's no surprise that people are willing to risk their lives to get it. The fight between the two bulls at the end takes this social struggle for status and translates it to nature, as if to highlight how absurd this all ultimately is. The two bulls, the most valuable creatures in Ireland, end up destroying each other in the process of trying to prove who's the best, and in the end, neither bull survives. In this way, the Táin Bó Cúailnge paints a vivid picture of the price we pay when we devote ourselves to social hierarchies that demand constant competition, all in the name of pride and glory. In such systems, friendship can never truly exist between individuals striving for the same position, because every potential ally could one day be an opponent. By obsessing over pride and social status, we condemn ourselves to a kind of isolation where we can be surrounded by people who are either above or below us, but none are ever truly equal. The fact these themes can still resonate with us today might be a bad sign for the progress that we made in the many years since the Táin was written, but I think this still makes the story worth reading, in the name of learning to do better in the many years to come.